We're going to be talking about inflation, what that means for you, means for your pocket, what it means. Everybody has a different take on it.
The store owner's like, I can't keep up with all this demand. I should raise prices. And that is inflation.
Now let's just look at a couple pros and cons of inflation. Let's talk about a real life example. Turkey's inflation rate right now is above 70%.
Prices in the country rose by 73.5%.
This Big Mac meal here in Turkey costs 33 Turkish lira. This meal is going to cost you the equivalent of working more than 3 hours.
You're working a full shift just to eat pretty much your meals for the entire day. How are you supposed to afford everything else?
We have a bit to go before we get inflation under control. Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to another episode. So we finally came up with a name for the series, Make It Make Sense. It is a segment on our channel where we take a look at things that are happening in the financial news and, we make it make sense for you. My name is Keril Sawyer. I am the host of this. This is the New Rules channel. So today we're going to be talking about inflation. But before we dive into inflation and what that means for you, means for your pocket, first I want to introduce my audio and video producer, Olivia. You want to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, welcome to Make It Make Sense. We finally have a title. I don't know about you guys, but I'm loving it. And today we're just talking about an important topic that is affecting pretty much everyone around the world. I think it's a really important one today.
All right, so the first thing that we're going to start off with is just the definition of inflation and what it means. Everybody has a different take on it, but I think it's relatively straightforward. So we'll start with one of my favorite sites, Investopedia. They usually have great definitions, very in-depth with nuance. Let's take a look at what Investopedia is calling inflation. Inflation is the decline of purchasing power of a given currency over time. A quantitative estimate of the rate at which the decline in purchasing power occurs can be reflected in the increase of an average price level of a basket of selected goods and services in an economy over a period of time. The rise in prices, which is often expressed as a percentage, means that a unit of currency effectively buys less than it did in prior periods. Inflation can be contrasted with deflation, which occurs when the purchasing power of money increases and prices decline. So what are a couple of the key takeaways from that definition? Inflation is the rate at which the value of a currency is falling, and consequently the general level of prices for goods and services is rising. Inflation is sometimes classified into three types: demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. The most commonly used inflation indexes are the consumer price index and the wholesale price index. Inflation can be viewed positively or negatively depending on the individual viewpoint and rate of change. That's Investopedia's definition of inflation. So what does it mean to me exactly, or what should it mean for you? All it means is that over a certain given period of time, the money that you have, like let's say you have like $1, and typically $1 can buy you a meal, right? Let's say it could buy you a burger at McDonald's. Now, over time, that burger at McDonald's, instead of only costing $1, might cost you $3, which means that now you have to work more, or you need more capital, which requires more energy in order to actually be able to still purchase that same dollar, which means that you can actually buy less with other things. And I'll give you a couple of examples as we go through this, but I'd also like to get some other cool definitions of what I've seen from around the web.
Okay, first up, the simplest definition. Inflation is when there is more money in the economy than stuff to spend it on. But if you're like me, the simplest definition never does it for you. So let's try this. Imagine a village that has one market where people buy all of their stuff, their food, their clothes. But one day the government shows up because they're worried about the economy of this village. So they tell the people that if they want to take out a loan, they're going to make sure that the banks will not charge them a high interest rate. They want to encourage the people to take out loans and spend money. Oh, and they also drop off a giant pile of cash for everyone in the village. And everyone in the village is like, sweet, I'm feeling pretty rich. Villagers now are going to their market and they're buying way more stuff. Many of them have been eyeing the fancy electric bike in the market that before they couldn't justify, but now they totally can because they have all this new money. The store owner's like, sweet, this is great for business, but he's running out of bikes. In fact, he's running out of everything because now all of these people have extra money and they're buying way more than they used to. The store owner's like, I can't keep up with all this demand. I should raise prices. And that is inflation.
All right, so that's another definition of inflation explained by one of the best explainers on the internet, Johnny Harris. So COVID happened. A lot of people lost their jobs, right? Companies were going out of business. And so what ended up happening was the government ended up giving out a ton of money. You got stimmy checks, you got PPP loans, right? A lot of scamming going on, which is a whole nother side topic, but there's a lot of money flushed into the economy. And they were able to spend that money with the supply chain as things were kind of running out. What ended up happening, prices started to get raised. All right, so here's a real life example of inflation. As I started to look for properties, I'm in the market to buy a house. Actually bought a house, so I'm out of the market right now. But when I was buying a house, typically houses that were in like the 550, 600K range were now bidded up or now priced at 650 and more, and then people were bidding on them even further. So a house that typically you could have bought before at like 500 grand now was like 600 grand, and then sometimes 700 grand, where people were actually paying more than the appraised price. So that's crazy, right? You have less pricing power. You can buy less with the money that you actually have. And I'll give you a couple examples. So first example is I put in on a house in a decent neighborhood, right, that could go up. And the house was in the fives. It ended up getting bid up about $100,000 to the point where I wasn't really interested in anymore, because my buying power for what I was looking for wasn't that house, wasn't that neighborhood, and wasn't that price point. I put it on another house, which was 650K. And then after a few back and forth conversations, another bidder came in and paid $700,000 for that house, which once again was out of my price range. I didn't want to pay for a house that wasn't worth that much, but was priced really high. So what I ended up doing was I found a house in a different area where I was able to negotiate a price of $630,000 roughly, and I was able to buy it at that price. And if you look at the comps in the neighborhood, it's a little closer, right? It might be a little bit over, but not as much. And the reason why I was able to do that is because the interest rate started going up, which means a lot of people had less pricing power, less buying power, and there were less offers on the house than it was about a year ago. And if you don't understand how crazy the real estate market was a year ago, here's a quick clip.
Some big numbers coming out of the housing market today, and they're not looking pretty if you're looking to buy or rent.
Home prices surged in March 2021, up 13% from the year prior.
Home prices in the U.S. have climbed at a record pace during the pandemic.
As a result, monthly mortgage payments have now become increasingly unaffordable.
Let's talk about a real life example that's affecting a country. One that stands out to me is what's happening in Turkey.
Chart of the day comes from the nation of Turkey, where inflation is on, let's just say it, another level. The country's statistical agency reporting that prices in the country rose by 73.5% year over year in May, food prices almost doubling. And we have to remember, these are rates of change here, not necessarily levels. So you see all of this compounding as we've seen inflation rates above 50% in many of the previous months. We have to keep in mind that there's been a lot of politics behind this.
So it's absolutely insane that Turkey's inflation rate right now is above 70%. Now, that's just a number, right? The same as how our numbers currently are, right? You just hear, oh, inflation is going up by a percentage or 2% or, 100 basis points. What the does that mean? Let's look at exactly what's happening in Turkey and how that's really affecting people on a day-to-day basis, like with their spending.
This Big Mac meal here in Turkey costs 33 Turkish lira. That's about $3.41 at today's exchange rate. Pretty reasonable for McDonald's, but consider this. If you're earning minimum wage here, this meal is gonna cost you the equivalent of working more than 3 hours. But that's just McDonald's.
Olivia, I can't even imagine like working 3 hours for like a meal, right? So if somebody works 9 hours a day, like what that means is they could eat 3 meals. So it's almost like you're eating to work, and you're not even eating well. You're eating McDonald's.
I mean, McDonald's is good, but it's not healthy, and it's like if you're working a full shift just to eat pretty much your meals for the entire day, how are you supposed to afford everything else? How are you supposed to afford your rent or your mortgage, your bills? That's insane.
And you're right. Nothing's wrong with McDonald's. I'm sure it's great food, but I'm also sure there are healthier options that are more that can help you live longer. But you were saying that also, like in the UK, energy has spiked. So how's inflation affecting you in the UK, and what's the government currently doing about it?
Yeah, so energy prices here have been quite a big topic, just because in some households, energy prices could go up about £600 to £800 a year, which about American, that's about $1,500 to $2,000, which is a lot, especially for low-income households. For me, it's I live with my partner, so for us, it shouldn't be too much more. But if you're a family, it's going to go up dramatically. And so what's happening is the government has kind of put a cap on how much energy companies can increase their prices by for, I think it's about a year. And then next year, they're allowed to raise it even more. But what they're doing is they're sending every household about 400, I think it's 400 pounds. And then, but the problem is with this is it's not going directly to the households to spend as needed. It's going to the energy companies, and the energy companies will then put it towards your bill as they see fit. So it's like it is a problem, but you're not going to get it right away, and it's spread over a couple of months, so maybe your monthly bill will go down, or if you pay on a prepayment meter, you'll get 400 pounds on there. But it's hard because, yes, the government's sending the money, this 400 pounds, but they're sending it to the energy companies, and it's, I'm a bit skeptical about how it'll be spent and if it'll be spent right. I would prefer to have it in my bank account and spend it as I see fit, because I might be struggling in another way one month, and the 400 pounds could help me there. But that's kind of what they're doing with the energy prices. And, gas here is insane at the moment. I think the other day I think it was like £2.20 per litre, which is ridiculous. I've never seen it that high. So it's mad. There's a ton of things happening here. The government seems to be doing some things, but not a lot. So hopefully, fingers crossed, they'll wake up a bit and kind of help people out. I'm hoping.
That's kind of insane because it's almost like big industries making out well during all these hard times, because it's like, hey, instead of having them lower their prices or come to some sort of agreement, they're like, hey, we'll take government money, taxpayer money, and then we'll pay directly the energy companies who are already profitable, not necessarily the people who actually need the money and need to spend it how they want to spend it. So that's absolutely like government's paying big industry and people are getting richer, but not the people who actually need the funds or really need the relief. So it's like if my bill was $1,000 and now it's $1,400 and you give me a credit for $1,400, well, they could have just not raised the rates, or they could have worked it on the back end and give me that $400 to spend how I want to spend it.
Exactly. And there are certain things the government's doing that for like lower income houses that are on benefits, they are getting a bit more money. I think it's about £650 they're getting, which I believe is about 1,500 American. So they're getting a bit more help, lower income families, but it's just, I don't think it's enough. They're saying with gas prices here, it's insane. And it's called a windfall tax, where you'll see a little bit at the gas pump, but that's going to be a few pence every time you fill up. It's not going to be helping us as much as it should. And in the meantime, all these companies are benefiting, like he said, they're profiting from it, when really the government could just say, no, you can't raise energy prices.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely insane. Hopefully, guys, you get a better understanding of how inflation is affecting not only the US, but what it looks like when it spikes and how it's affecting people across the world. Now, let's just look at a couple pros and cons of inflation. The advantages of inflation. Moderate inflation enables economic growth. Moderate inflation allows adjustment of real wages. So that's when you get like a raise increase due to the cost of living. Moderate inflation allows adjustment of prices. It allows you to budget into the future, knowing that, like, if it's consistent, then you could say, okay, a house is $500,000 this year, but I know in the next couple years it's going to be a little bit more. Therefore, I need a wage increase, or I need to switch jobs. And then, of course, inflation is better than deflation. The interest rates going up, what Jerome Powell is trying to do is cause deflation in order to get inflation back down to a normal price, so it doesn't go super crazy like it is in the example of the housing craze that we just came through, and then also what's happening in Turkey. So now let's talk about some of the disadvantages of inflation. Disadvantages are: it creates uncertainty and lower investment. Higher inflation often leads to lower growth and less stability. Reduces international competitiveness. To reduce inflation can lead to a recession, fall in value of savings, and if wages don't keep up, lower real wages. Yeah, so let's just dive into that. So some of the disadvantages of inflation is the fact that you could buy less. And I feel like I can buy less now, right? Like the example I gave earlier on in this conversation is my mom was able to buy a house for $300,000. My house is in the $600,000 range. And even though I make more money, it doesn't really equate well. So that's inflation going up. That's housing prices just to live in a nice, decent neighborhood in a decent sized house. I'm paying double the cost of what my mom paid. And I can only imagine for someone who has multiple kids or doesn't make as much or doesn't work for a tech company, what it's really like for them to have to deal with like inflation. So one of the disadvantages of inflation is the fact that at some point the interest rate gets hiked up by the central bank, and then deflation happens, which typically causes, loss of jobs. Some tech companies have started to lay people off. I know Robinhood is one of those companies. There's less investment, right? There's companies and individuals like myself are scared to actually make investments in the stock market, which leads to a downward spiral to get inflation back under control. And so, and sometimes that keeps happening until you get pushed into a recession where there's a lot of job loss, people aren't currently working. There's a debate back and forth of whether or not we're going to end up in a recession. I don't know. We'll continue to watch the news to do so, but that is just one of the disadvantages of inflation actually going up. And so the goal of the central bank is to actually keep it kind of even and in the middle so that inflation steadily rises 1 to 2% a year is what we're ideally looking for. Anything above that, it gets kind of crazy. All right, so let's talk about a few takeaways. Inflation is basically when the money that you have doesn't have as much buying power. And so therefore, inflation needs to be kept under, a very specific growth rate, 1 to 2%, and that allows the economy to grow. Takeaway number 2 is that typically when inflation is rising at a crazy, insane pace, the central bank's going to step in and they're going to start to raise interest rates in order to get inflation under control. Sometimes that causes a recession. And so if I'm in your shoes and I'm thinking about this from my wallet, you should be taking a look at, like what's going on with your company, whether or not they're going to be layoffs, whether or not you're going to be affected. You should be updating your resume. You should be looking for jobs. You should be looking for different ways to make money. So the third part that you should be thinking about is the fact now that you'll see like there's less investment in the market, meaning that stocks are dropping and certain investors are selling off. To me, that means it's a good buying opportunity because if you're trying to get into certain stocks at a certain price, you're able to do that now. So I'll give you an example. Recently, I just purchased a ton of Amazon stock because Amazon was trading at, before the split, it was trading at 3,800 and now it's trading at a less than that. So to me, like that was a good bargain. So I ended up picking up some Amazon stock. I picked up stock in Baba, which is a Chinese company. And I also picked up some more Google stock, even though I own Google shares already. Savvy investors are also looking at the stock market of what they can currently buy like right now. My advice would be don't necessarily buy in all at one point, but you can dollar cost average into it. So buy a little bit at a time. We have a bit to go before we get inflation under control. I don't know whether it's going to be a year or 2 years, but as the stocks drop, investments are lower and easier to get into, it's probably a good time for you to actually invest into the stock market or take a look at your investments and based on your own analysis, be able to actually buy things when they're low now so that when the economy is under control and inflation is under control, you can ride that wave, that prosperity wave up. That's all I want to talk about today, guys. I wanted to share what inflation is, right? Some examples of inflation, how it applies to real life scenarios, not only in our country, but in other countries. And then also some strategies that you can use or, like things you should be thinking about during this inflationary period in our history. So with that said, if you like content like this, you know what to do. You can hit the like and subscribe button. If you're on our blog, you can actually put your email address in, and every time we release a video, you will actually get that video. Also, make sure you follow us on socials, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, peace out.